Hey, and welcome back to the Pop Marketing Podcast. We are back to talk pop culture, talk brand marketing, and man, I am so glad to be talking to this man right here, Faris Yakob. Great to have you on the podcast, and great to just connect again since we saw each other actually weirdly in person in Tennessee last.
Yes, lovely to be here. Thank you for having me, and I'm excited too. Also, I just realized that you should do a remix of the is it 50 Cent's PIMP song?
Yes,
Like
do tell.
you're a mother ending PMP because you're a PMP, pop
Oh
marketing.
yeah, no, it's totally. When I write it out, I'm like, man, that's pimp. But how do I make a play on that? But now you've just given me the
I'm here to
answer,
help. Here to help.
and I thank you. I'll take any of those. I'll take anything you got. All right, so for those that don't know what you do or where you come from, and in the world of advertising and marketing, and just Faris, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm Faris Yakob. Currently, alongside my wife and partner, we run a nomadic creative consultancy called Genius Steals, which means that we, by choice, don't want to live anywhere in particular. We travel as much as we can, if not constantly, pandemics allowing, and go from client to client and speaking gig to speaking gig, and in between, try and find inspiration in the world. Before this iteration of my career, yes, I worked in advertising primarily, but in lots of different roles, media planning, comm strategy, account planning, brand strategy, for a brief period, creative director. And so I sort of did lots of different things in advertising in London, in Sydney, and in New York. And then I wrote a book about what I thought about advertising, which allowed us to begin kind of a different leg of our career. So that's kind of what we do.
I think that wraps it up well. Where are you at right now? Where were we?
Currently in Porto, Portugal. Obviously, travel was somewhat constrained in the last couple of years, which doesn't suit our natures or really our business in some ways. But we're now in Porto, Portugal for the next month or so. And then we have our first speaking gig in person in Orlando at the end of the month, which will be exciting if it happens. Fingers crossed, assuming it will. But in general, yeah, we work across what I call the creative industrial spectrum with clients, with agencies of all disciplines, with media companies, and with other, ancillary entities that exist in that world, be it startup or trade body. But yeah.
I think that's what's so interesting, and that's why I want your point of view, because you get to see it from a lot of different angles and get to see it from a lot of different perspectives from clients of how kind of an agency thinks, how you kind of see how a brand sees an idea. You kind of see how somebody like TikTok or Facebook is kind of seeing ideas and the world, and they're different lenses, right? Like always. And yeah, and your job is kind of to understand where they're coming from and how do you get them to do something a little bit different based on where they kind of currently are. What is to you, what is, when somebody says popular culture, what is it? And then what is like advertising's relationship with it, right?
Interesting question. Very interesting. Okay, so popular culture, by its definition, is things that are famous enough that people have heard of to some degree, although in the post-fragmentation world, that's increasingly less the case, right? Things that used to be famous were famous for everybody, and now things that are famous for small groups of people often, which is a different kind of famousness, I think. But that said, it is kind of the cultural substrate for which we get all of our ideas, right? We learn to be decent human beings growing up watching superhero movies. We learn about relationships from terrible rom-coms that think stalking is the way to find your girl. We learn about the world through the lenses of popular culture from different markets, different regions, different, places. So it is kind of the thing that we learn from and pull from in advertising. There used to be this idea that advertising at its very greatest kind of aspiration would be to sort of influence popular culture, to become part of culture, which is basically just saying our ambition is to make things famous, which I think is totally apposite, totally appropriate. That is right to me. But most of the time, I'd say advertising tends to draw from popular culture and leverage the aggregated attention that cultural assets have in order to sell or position products most of the time. And although it's impossible for brand work to become cultural touchstones, it's just less likely than people would like to believe, I think.
That's really where that's where I come to too, because the question always gets asked. It's an easy answer to say yes, advertising can be popular culture. We all know it. Like absolutely, it's got you especially in the world 20 years ago, right? Like in the world where popular culture really boomed from the 80s on. It's like you could you have mass. I can pay for it. I can get it out, and so a ton of people see it and it works and it's good, and I understand that it's popular culture. The question I always ask is like, do you think we make popular culture in advertising, or do we draft off and use the stuff that's kind of going on and use it to power and make our stuff relevant?
Far more so, yes, but at a sort of more epistemological level, all culture does that.
Mm.
Like all popular culture absorbs his other popular culture and then regurgitates it, and then some of the bits that become famous get dislocated from their source material, right? So I was reading quite a fun book called the Modern Myths by Philip Ball, who's a science writer. He talks a little bit about this kind of how, and as you know, my company's called Genius Steals, so I don't believe in originality. Everything comes from somewhere. Everything is inspired and combined and inspired and combined. But things like the Joker from Batman books, which is actually, this is in the Grant Morrison book, not in the Myth book, but it doesn't matter. The Batman is a direct copy. I mean, sorry, the Joker is a direct copy of a villain from a movie in the 1920s who was played by a very particular character. It's exactly the same face, the makeup, the characteristics. It was directly lifted from this movie. But now Joker's much more famous than the movie ever was. And so it becomes like, oh, this is a thing. It's like, yes, but it was literally a lift and transposed into a different thing, you know? So
And now
I
that
think
thing is forgotten. You'll see pictures of it, and 100% people would be like, "Oh, that's like the old Joker."
exactly.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And that happens with everything. Like culture does that. Culture is inherently recombinant. It's always reproducing. And then when you first get exposed to an idea, you're like, oh, look at this cool new thing. And it's like, well, the person who made this probably has other references that are involved. Ultimately, it becomes like a measure of, again, it's just fame. Whatever the most famous version of that idea becomes kind of the dominant version of that in culture, you know?
Yeah, and to talk about fame a bit, I did read Paul Fedwick's like "Why Does the Peddler Sing?" and very smart. The accent had me the whole time. I was in it, yeah, and of course I'm in because I'm like, oh, you're really giving me what I want. We take things a bit too seriously, kind of explaining advertising's need to kind of grow up
Mm-hmm.
in order because we're asking for a lot of money and people are very serious in business. And so we kind of run from kind of simple stuff of saying what we really want is to be famous, and brand and celebrity are pretty close. So like, let's just use the same things, an idea and a
You're
person, same
entirely
thing.
right, because, and we talk about this still all the time, right? When we sit down to do business grown up stuff, our brains go into business grown up mode, and then we talk about business grown up people. And so we sort of collapse all the kind of abstract, weird, associative parts of our brain into this, like, I want to tell you that this product is really good at this thing that I think you need a solution for, which is fine. I mean, it's not that it's wrong necessarily. It's just very reductive in how we think about it. And I forget if it was Ogilvy or someone said, like, in that book, don't sing your sales message. No one likes a singer, whatever. And I think what Paul has been brilliant at doing is he fundamentally misunderstands what we're doing completely, and utterly misunderstands what we're doing. Like, entertainment is the cost of admission to someone's brain. And this is true on stage as a presenter. It's true as an advertisement. It's true with a movie. It's true with any kind of thing that goes into culture and is absorbed by the senses, right? Entertainment is the cost of admission to someone's brain.
Yes, and you don't see probably a lot of ideas in a modern agency that are people want to push against the jingle or things that have worked for a long time of just kind of being not having a ton of purpose or a lot of things behind it, right? Like not having. What do you think it seems to have got, or has it? And I don't realize how. Why do people push against those ideas in the agencies and
Because because they're not as easy to turn into linear thought processes you can explain to accountants and financiers at one end of the buy chain, right? So the ultimate taskmasters inside an organization, like a big client one, isn't the CMO really. It's the person who gives the CMO money.
Yeah.
And you have to convince them to do things that don't feel very, irrational in the very obvious literal sense of that. I also think, to your point, the industry, because we are so fed by and immersed in popular culture, like that's why you get into advertising, right? You want to be an artist, or you just love popular culture. That's something that kind of draws us to the industry. That and getting to wear trainers to work, obviously,
True.
which is sneakers, big part of the appeal, frankly, still to me. But it's because it's very faddish, right? The nature of culture is very faddish. It spins on a dime. New things happen, and because of that, we tend to be reactive equally. We tend to react to fads in culture, and often they come not just externally but internally. You have these epochs of advertising where Claude Hopkins in the 20s and 30s wrote "Marketing is now a science" based on his direct response experience, essentially. And then you have the creative revolution in the 60s, and then you sort of revert back, and then digital moves things to a more analytic place. But it tends to be this, and it happens across all forms of culture, this pendulum that swings backwards and forwards based on generations or regimes at certain marketers or whatever, where the pendulum keeps swinging. And so we go from, let's just do really fun things that entertain people and earn attention that way, to let's target them at the laser level where we can, track every possible action and event they've made online and use that to infer they're the perfect, efficient target for our communication. And both have obviously roles. Both have roles to play, no doubt. But we tend to swing wildly from one and then overcompensate and swing wildly to the other, which is a very human thing to do. Like we tend to overcompensate all the time. We can't help it. Like, oh, you were too far to the left. The next shot you'll hit will be far, far too far to the right. That's just what we tend to do as people,
Yeah, it's hard to fight with just our biology on certain things, especially binary is something he talks about a lot too, and the crappiness of black and white, yes or no. But boy, it feels right in your brain and you see it. I mean, you're on Twitter a lot. You see the fight of advertising Twitter, and I see both sides of it, and I'm like, hey, the answer, gang, is not 100%
of course
this side or 100% the big idea or on personalization.
It's not strategic to make that kind of claim anyway. It's obviously silly.
Yeah,
right? You're like, it depends on context. It depends on lots of things. Like, it depends is the only appropriate response to most complex questions. But to your point, especially in the West, we're trained to think in very binary ways, kind of as a intellectual fossil of our derivation of Greek thinking as kind of the sort of foundation of thought for Western culture, right? And in Greek thinking, they invented logic to some degree, at least. And logic has this basic principle: like, things can either be or not be, but not both. Like, you can't have it exists and it doesn't exist make sense together in logical terms. So we can't really get our head around that way of thinking. Whereas in the Eastern philosophical traditions, everything's a lot more circular, infinite. Everything is the same thing ultimately when seen from the right point of view, and so on and so forth. So they're less anchored to kind of binary as a way of thinking, as a way of understanding reality,
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I was going to follow that up. You get to see it, like not just see it on television or on YouTube, but you get to like be in those cultures, whether in Asia, India, right, wherever you are. There is a difference in culturally on that kind of thinking, meaning like, hey, it's not yes or no, it's kind of a mix of both, and you kind of gotta have both, and it's okay. In
100%. So I forget, I think it's Thailand that we got this from, but the expression same but different to me is the best encapsulation of this problem. Like, in Thailand, they say it a lot, same but different. And it's usually a way of selling you something where it's like, I want to buy this t-shirt. It's like, it's not the same t-shirt, but it's basically the same but different. And logically speaking, language-wise in English, you can't have same but different. That doesn't make sense. And yet intuitively as humans, we can feel that means something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely means something. And what it means is you've abstracted from the particular of a specific thing to, it's a bit like that, and this is a bit like it, and what's the problem? It's a fine substitute, but they're much more flexible in that way of thinking. But yeah, it is interesting because even in the last decade of traveling quite extensively, there has been an obvious homogenizing effect of globalization and global corporations. At the very beginnings of the last decade when we were traveling, you would go to places and not recognize retail brands or brands as much. Still some, but you'll be like, oh, there's a McDonald's here now. That's cool. And then increasingly everywhere has the same global retail brands, global fast food brands especially are everywhere. Like the same American fast food brands in every market you go to. KFC is huge in China, like massive. And that is both interesting and confusing because it makes you sort of believe things are more similar than they are. And a lot of the similarities are not surface level. They're literally in how people think and what assumptions they make as a sort of base level of thing.
Yeah, and it leads me to like popular culture. So you get to see that too, and I find that extremely interesting because people, I don't think, understand how global of a thing Western popular culture and what that does, how powerful that is. Like if you tell the stories, you tell the narrative, right? Like it is a extremely powerful thing, even if it's superhero movies or whatever it is, or if it's Friends. Like, do you find those things are kind of universal, or certain things are universal whenever you travel?
I mean, there's a village in, is it Laos, Rosie? Laos. I know they say Lao if you've been there, but I prefer Laos as an S there. It's fine. There's a village there. It used to be a very big tourist town.
Vang Vieng.
It's called Vang Vieng. That's right, Vang Vieng. It used to be a big tourist town. It had like a lazy river with all these bars off it, and lots of tourists would go there and get messed up. And then it became a problem because it was too messy, and the government was like, calm that down, guys. But because the heyday was literally late 90s, early 2000s, every single bar, and I'm not using this as a euphemism, I'm not being hyperbolic. I am saying every single bar and cafe in this town shows Friends on repeat on every screen. Just every single one. You can go and from one to one and watch any episode of Friends you want if you just go around the town, and it's incredible to see that because they're sort of like when they last made a lot of money, this is what drew the tourists in, and they just don't know what to do now. It's still doing it. They're still doing Friends, or at least they were 5 years ago when we went, But to your point, in pseudo-Marxist terms, you can call it cultural imperialism, right? America's culture engine is extremely well-funded and very, very good, well-distributed. And I saw this talk once at a conference really long time ago now, like a really long time, before I'd heard about K-pop as an idea, before I'd, seen Parasite. And the woman was talking about the cultural strategy for South Korea. And her insight was exactly what you said, which is that the reason you can sell Yankee blue jeans and Nike shoes all over the world is because you sold Mickey Mouse and superheroes first. And South Korea as a country went, okay, so we need to sell music and movies to the rest of the world, and then we can sell them other stuff on the back end of that, which is literally what they're doing.
It's a strategic.
Extremely so, like a government-funded strategy where movies designed for English audiences or at least global appeal, equally with K-pop designed to export out of that market.
And you actually saw it. Like you actually have seen it in the last 20 years.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, like they're doing it very consciously because they worked out the same exact thing, which is you sell Mickey Mouse, then you sell Yankee blue jeans.
It makes a lot of sense, and then it makes me think like of Civ, the video game, and that is the true cultural,
like Sid Meier's Civilization.
Yeah. It's that would be a cultural takeover. Like that is it. Like that is just Mickey Mouse. Disney.
And games are, particularly now, more global than ever. So you do have these,
Yes, and not only that, but a lot of these countries are a lot more ahead of us in taking games seriously. Korea
and having bandwidth,
one of them, and had I remember this was in college. This is in the early 2000s of Korea having a channel for StarCraft, I believe it was. It was such a big. It was such a big phenomena that they had a TV channel at the time. It was a TV channel that had live StarCraft, right?
I mean, that is so ahead of its time as to be insane. I mean, Twitch is an extraordinarily interesting and very powerful business now, even though it plays in a world that most people who don't play games, even people who play games, don't necessarily get why you would watch people play games. Like there is a great deal of pleasure in it. And then I think somebody tweeted this. It wasn't my idea. Someone was like, "Why do you watch someone play video games? It's so stupid." And he was like, "Do you watch the NFL? Do you watch the
And
Olympics?"
then their
And you're
brain snaps. Like you hear their brain break because they're like, everything I do.
exactly to that. I'm sorry. Are you playing football? No. So
Same, but same, but different.
same but different. Exactly. Same but different.
Let's talk about games because games is interesting. It's impossible to keep up with, so I stopped because I just,
100%.
to my point right now, it's more of understanding the new things that are coming up. And e-games, esports, I'm so far removed. I have to talk to people that are right in the middle of it because it's gotten so enormous. And games in general. Okay, so saying that, coming in with an insight to a brand and saying, "Hey, consumers are gamers," to me is kind of like saying, "Hey, consumers breathe."
Gamers like music. Most people like movies or something like that. Some people don't like movies, but that's an unusual, right? That's like that's not the thing, you know. And so we've discussed gaming a lot, obviously, but the ESA, the Entertainment Software Association, released their new report like literally a couple of days ago, and now it's like 70-ish% of Americans play games. It's higher when you get a bit younger, but adults, right? The average age of a person who plays games, because gamer, to your point, is not a designation that most people who play games think applies to them. But the average age of a gamer is like 31 years old with a house and children, because we grew up with the consoles. Whether or not you can get a PS5 at the moment is obviously quite difficult, but we all grew up with them.
I keep checking, and I'm like, "Come on, I'm old enough now. I can wait for it to simmer down." And I keep checking, and I'm like, "Seriously, it's been like I can't get my
Like, do
hands
you think
on it."
was that
It's got
intentional?
to be.
It
It
feels
has
like,
to.
I mean, it must be because like the production processes can't. It just seems so odd to limit the thing there. And
It's
anyway, quite
Sony.
strange.
Like they understand this. They understand how to make things and put them out into the world in mass quantity. It just
Yes, exactly. They know how to manufacture
seems
products. I'm
strange,
sure they
but it
do.
also seems like whatever they're doing is working for them. But like,
For sure. For sure. But no, you're right. So gamers are everybody, give or take, some people, and therefore you need to segment the idea of people who play games. And the thing about games is they are massively fragmented.
mm,
They're extremely different. They're like the typology of person who plays solo immersive role playing games on a console, which tends to be an older player who tends to be male like myself. But you know that's the thing. I tend to play those games versus online network games. A totally different typology of game, totally different environment, totally different experience, totally different audience, blah 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 blah. Which confuses people because they're like, "Oh, it's all the same thing." I'm like, "No, it's confusing." But you know, as I wrote about, gaming as now is quite famous that it's bigger than music, movies, and sports combined. As an industry, it dwarfs these industries because people are very happy to shell $60 for a video game when that game comes out. Or so like, I wouldn't pay $30 for the Black Widow release on Disney Plus. I'm like, no, I'll just wait. Why would I do that? Like, I'm fine to wait. Thanks, though. You know.
but yeah, I appreciate you trying to find the price which I will pay. Right, but 30 might be hitting the top there. Like even with me, that really needs to see it quickly.
Yeah, and you know, if I had a home theater and a massive setup and that kind of thing, then maybe, and I was watching with a family, I could see the economics of that making sense if it was about social primacy and all that kind of stuff. But even I was like, I'm not sure.
But
Yeah.
but gaming, yes, it's fragmented. Here it is, and it gets back to a bit on your book to paid attention, and I know that you've been working to write and bring that back in. Like 6 years later, is that
Yes,
right?
the new edition comes out November 8th now. We have a publication date. Has a new cover, which I like a lot more than the old cover. So that's the best news.
Fantastic! I can't wait. I better get a signed copy. But I will tell you this: it brings up a great transition to that because the attention is there. It's dumb. We all know that. Like the attention, there's what the stat that I think I saw you write on the Fortnite is like 10.4 million human hours of gameplay.
Yes, hours.
And look at Twitch, which is just watching people play that, and then you put together all the other gaming. So the amount of attention is
Yes.
is is there. And if our equation would work out correctly, which is to say marketers and advertisers flow ourselves directly to where the attention is, right? What is the, and I think you said it in the fragmentation, but there's a lot of fragmentation now in social and everything too, but it seems easier to get to. What holds brands back from involving themselves in gaming?
So the game, like the mechanisms to get involved in game, have historically been very complex, right? So you could either build your own ad for games, like BK did with Crispin in like 0506 with the Sneak King, right? It's extraordinarily expensive to do that in a way that is not terrible, because making games is just hard. Making games that people like to play is an extremely hard thing to do. When I had a digital agency in New York, we'll hire our own supply of, like, we're going to build our own products and make our own games and all that stuff. And we did. We tried to make a couple of games. It turns out, even playing games your whole life, like all of us did in the scene, it doesn't make you good at game design. Game design is extremely complicated. I'm like, oh, this isn't fun. Oh, it looks great. Yep. It's not fun, is it? No, it is not. It's just extremely hard. But also, game development cycles are very, very long. 3 to 5 years, if not longer, vast amounts of money. And finding a role for brands in those spaces has been historically very complex. Then you get the option of like the in-game networks that basically shove programmatic ads into billboards and so on in the games, which, has some value as a kind of lower funnel network, I suppose. But it's like, what's the role for ads in there? Games exist kind of somewhat discreetly from popular culture, which is one of the weird things about them. Although I think they are the biggest kind of popular culture we now have, they don't exist in the world in the same way as music and film.
Yes, and it's weird that you say that, because it also integrates with popular culture, with NBA games and different things that are like, it's a very strange difference. But you're right. It feels, and I don't have anything to point at, but it feels like it's separate. I agree. Oh, it does. It feels separate.
And there's something very personal about the agency one derives from playing a game, right? Being a character in a thing where you're in control of the situation, is very satisfying as a human. Agency is what we want. And, Jane McGonigal wrote Reality Sucks quite a long time ago. Was it Reality Sucks? I think it is. But she's great. But talking about how real life lacks structured progression and rewards, and therefore games provide that in a way which we can't get being spreadsheet jockeys or PowerPoint jockeys in our information knowledge working lives, But I do think that, so to that point, right? So it used to be really hard as part of the problem, and then it wasn't very satisfying when it happened. So there's a massive lack of knowledge and interest by the reality is broken. That's it. Reality is broken. Thank you. And it is, but also it's legacy from agencies' experiences, right? Agencies are based on art and copy. The ultimate dream of an agency, generally in the old version of it, is to make very expensive pieces of film that go in the Super Bowl. That's the number one thing you can do, right? And the art and craft of making film is fundamentally different to being involved with the game. It's just not the same thing at all. Ask Amazon. No matter how much money you throw at the gaming studio at Amazon, nothing comes out of that studio. Like nothing, not a single game has been produced despite billions of dollars of investment, because it's hard. You can't just buy, So that's part of it. I do think, though, I like until very recently, I was locked inside I like the console game. I play on my own. I like the immersive experience. I want to be left alone. It's a fun, the world goes away and I'm in this place. That's great. And then a couple months ago, I went on this, maybe 6 weeks ago, I went on a little solo retreat to a cabin in the woods on my own to clean my head and commune with nature and play the guitar and become a better human being. So long story short, I started playing Fortnite. And Fortnite is great, by the way. It is an incredibly fun game to play. That's why it is the most played game in the world in history ever. It's fun. It has a level playing field every single time. So everybody's the same. No matter how good you get, you don't get to level up in the same way. Not exactly anyway. But more importantly, the business model and the insertion model for brands is so smart and so beautiful that I just didn't understand it. I really didn't get it until I played it. And like, it's free. It's on every platform for free, which is already like, well, a good reach driver. Free is very compelling to many people, especially young people, obviously. And then if you want to be involved, they just license IP from different parts of popular culture. and then rev share the skins because you get bored of playing with the same character, and you get it's purely aesthetic variation. So the game never changes, but you get bored looking at yourself the same way, and you're willing to pay $5 here or there for aesthetic variation of your character and personalization and so on. In fact, I saw, taken with a pinch of salt, obviously, because it's a Samsung award entry. But there was a Samsung award entry for Fortnite which said like there was an anti-bullying skin. Because if you couldn't afford to buy your own skins, you get the default skin, and everyone knows that you're default. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know if that's real or not. Like again, it's hard to say, but the insight is at least interesting. And the way they do the sort of very short term access to the skins. So basically, the skins are released for like a week or 2 weeks at a time. So either you buy them or you don't get them. So they create constant scarcity. Like if you like this, you got to get it now, otherwise it's gone. And you're like, that's extraordinarily smart.
And you'll never get it back. And the thing that's so interesting to me is that I was there at the specific place and time, and I will watch younger people play the game and be like, that person is deadly. And they haven't seen the person play. They just know by the skin that that person was here from the beginning, and they even do in chapters. And I think what it brings up for Fortnite is, you're right, the plumbing is so brilliant, because esports is the same way. They get to think about it. You get to design a world. You get to design a world like that is made for a lot of e-games were not interesting to watch on video screens. They just were not interesting. It was a bore. It was maybe fun to play it, but it wasn't made for it. So they just designed games like Fortnite that were like, cool, we're going to design it for that. So designing it for brands and for popular culture to participate in is exactly what Fortnite's done. You're right on.
It's brilliant. And you're right, it's a great insight, by the way, because like it used to be you watched games being played for the hilarious commentary. That's how the sort of early streamers got their commentary, and or there was a weird thing where the women would be playing in bikinis from the bath on Twitch, which was
it's still going. It's almost overtaken it. They've had some problems. There's a lot.
Yeah, and then there was the ASMR thing that got banned where she would lick the microphone in a horse's head, and I was like, is this a game? I'm really confused to what's happening now. But I do think that, to your point, like games weren't built for audiences. When I was in media, a long time ago, I guess, in the UK, back when media parties happened and they would try and take out all the media planners from agencies and entertain them, like the cinema people that sold cinema media space would take us to went to this party once, and we went to a cinema, and it's all for us, and we could play video games on a cinema screen, and it was just an incredible experience. It's just like, wow, it's really very big indeed. Like it's a very weird and amazing thing. But to your point, the games were not designed for that kind of thing, and so now it's like, will this look good from other people? And one of the things about Fortnite that I think is so brilliant, when you die, you then watch the person who kills you playing.
And then it goes in chain. I think it's brilliant.
So smart. It's so very, very smart, because it's always satisfying to see what happens to them. If they go on to win the whole thing, you're validated in your loss. You feel good about it. And if they get killed, you feel good about that too. And so it's like, it's brilliant and simple and small. And it's like, you're just watching them play, and I'm like, yes, but they killed me. So I want to see what they're up to.
Yeah, it is. And I think there is a lot to be said of this kind of the power that games have to be able to design it towards what they need it to do. Okay, I need to design it so people are like, the world's changing. I need it to design it so you can't do that with reality, right? Like you can't do it that way. And you'll see sport, and it's very similar to sports. Like baseball really wasn't made to be on television. American baseball.
It goes on forever.
It's made to be seen in a large venue when you're sitting there, because there's all this stuff going on. And that's not my enjoyment, but like I've been told this, and it doesn't translate well to the medium of television. So you have something now that games it's really mind blowing, especially esports. The more I look into it, because what I didn't realize is that, think about it, you don't only own the teams, but you own the game. Like no one owns football.
Yeah. Totally.
No one owns soccer. They're just impossible. But you actually you have control of the game.
Yeah.
Of X as well as the teams and everything that goes into it. It's kind of a
But as of this, go on. Sorry.
no. It's just an interesting. It's an interesting play, and what I also didn't realize is that there are streamers on teams that are part of the team. They might not be a competitor, but they're the streamers. They're the hype people. I think about it as on every esports team there is a entertainment person that is their streamers or a few streamers
Oh,
that are
wow.
just there, and they wear the jerseys. They are part of the team. They are part of that experience, and they are kind of the think of it as a modern mascot, but it's part of the overall team. They have the popularity, right? They have the it factor and the celebrity
Yeah.
that brings it to that team. And I'm like, good Lord, that is like designed for this culture, right? Like that we're in.
It was super interesting to me seeing, I didn't see the Travis Scott Fortnite experience because it predates my Fortnite gaming. But it made sense to me kind of analogously when you were talking about this sort of shift, because games are, as I said, they still sell for a lot of money. But you've got the free games, which is a whole different market in some ways on free mobile, casual gaming. The audience for that is mostly 55 plus women and children, but it's a very stable kind of core audience of people who like free gaming. Cool. That said, you can still charge 50, 60 bucks for a new release for anything and it still works. And so because of that, they haven't been super forced to reinvent business models, right? But it sort of reminds me of 20 years ago when music became a very different kind of idea. Like music now isn't a product you sell, it's advertising for other products that you sell, right? Advertising for very high margin shows, advertising for licensing, which is very high margin. Selling records itself isn't a profit driver in a particular way if you're a big star, right? And it feels like music will go to that point at some point where somebody will realize there's different business models that are totally working now and viable because we're all plugged in and we have decent bandwidth in most places, that will be like, okay, we don't buy the game anymore. This is what Fortnite did. Don't buy the game anymore, or the game is the advertising. We earn our right to play with you by being entertaining, as we said before, right? Entertainment is the right of admission. And then we make the incorporation of branded assets seamless and actually desirable, rather than the idea of you're buying ads. Whenever you're buying an ad, I feel like that's a wonderfully interesting place for us to be, right? It's like, I've just made this ad for my new movie. Do you want to buy it? I'm like, meh. It's so fundamentally different to how we used to think about advertising. And I think that's brilliant.
One more Fortnite piece. So do you feel, and have you played it enough to where you're feeling, I think it's interesting, and I don't know who to attribute this to, but that idea of modern games being like really social media 2.0 is really just games, right? Like look at Roblox. I have a lot of experience in Roblox, and it is a mind bender to watch a 7-year-old so easily transition to socializing. When she can't play with a friend, she just jumps on and plays with her friend. When she leaves, the friend will be here in person, and then the friend will leave, and then they continue to just play transitionally. And it's so seamless for her and comfortable for her. I, like you, am that person that I played games on my own. Maybe had a friend over with another controller, where I would I'd watch the game, but it was kind of my own immersive experience. No longer there. Do you see that kind of going on? Do you see the power in that being like metaverse look?
So Roblox, if you have children, you know about Roblox, and then it IPO'd and is now worth more than all of the advertising holding companies combined, quite easily. $50 billion market cap now. Just that one gaming company is worth more than all the advertising agencies in the entire world put together, which is hilarious and probably appropriate. It's a highly scalable thing that kids really love.
Again, Roblox free to go in, ubiquitous all over everything. So it is, you can play on anything, and it scales that way. And pretty horrendous graphics if you're thinking, if you're like, this company is that big.
But there's something interesting about building platforms across other people's platforms. There's something very satisfying to me about that. It's like I built a platform which runs horizontally across all these own platforms, and they can't not put it on there because the demand is so strong. It's brilliant, I think. But to your point, what put me off Fortnite to begin with was the social aspect. I did not want to be hanging out and making friends when I'm playing games. That wasn't my use case. It wasn't my need state, you know? What I like about Fortnite is that every battle royale is a bunch of random people, but they're people. And yeah, I don't know. It's almost transactional social relationships rather than long-term ones, which I find easier. But I can see that with Roblox. The stickiness comes from that's where you hang out. And that's probably, to tip it towards a Facebook conversation, it's more likely the metaverse is going to emerge from Fortnite or Roblox than it is from Facebook, realistically, right? Like it may be the VR Oculus version of the metaverse, which I sort of predicted would happen in 2014, frankly, but hey, no big deal, is the next stage on where we are very used to plugging ourselves into immersive screen, like full VR experiences, but like it's super niche and VR is very isolating. It's fun. Like we'll have my Rosie's dad's got an Oculus and like it's fun. We'll go over to hang at the house for family occasions and somebody will play and it's fun to watch somebody playing with a VR headset on because they look so stupid and they're running around bashing Beat Saber or whatever.
Absolutely. And I find it to be fun for the first few times.
Yep.
I mean, every time friends came over, I'd have them walk a plank.
Exactly.
Somebody'd fall off, and it was fantastic. And everybody was like, "This is going to change the world." People went out and bought it, and then 3 months later, it's almost like the old Nintendo Wii. Like it just sat there.
100%, yes. It's all gimmick. It doesn't have the grammar of gaming that makes it work as a system yet, you know. But it's getting cheaper and better and lighter. These are all necessary steps towards that evolution for sure. But I don't think it doesn't feel social in that way, you know? Whereas like, I think what I've liked about Fortnite now is that it's light social touch. There's real people, but I don't have to know who they are or engage with them in any way apart from shooting them or them shooting me.
The pressure isn't there to be social. If you don't want to, I can turn the mic off, I can turn it on. And then, you know, it becomes, and I remember hearing this 10 years ago. One of my friends who's an entrepreneur, and he was like, yeah, Call of Duty is my playing golf with business people. Like I don't play golf. I get on with business associates and we play Call of Duty, and we talk to each other and we do our meeting or whatever and that. And I always was so fascinated with that.
100%.
With that thought. And I think what's cool about gaming is it can be both a socially, we can play and talk to each other and catch up and we're still feel like we're playing, and or it can be, hey, I wanted this immersive thing for myself.
No, I think Fortnite's a gateway drug for that. I'm not a fan of the first person shooter. It's a high pressure environment. It's too much stress. Everybody's very good already because they're, you know.
Yes.
But if you go back to GoldenEye was a purely social experience, right? GoldenEye was an amazing game because 4 of you could play a satisfying experience with 4 of you. And there are still very few 4-player games that are satisfying to play, right? Mario Kart's the only real
truth
standout 4-player. There are a couple
that anyone can kind of jump onto,
yeah,
and
exactly.
You can kind of
the barriers to entry are low. Yes, 100%. And it feels unintimidating. Although if Nintendo's listening, can you please release a new Mario Kart? What is going on with that? It's been like a decade, I feel like, since Mario Kart 8 came out. And you know what you could do? DLCs. You could have new levels for Mario Kart. Why wouldn't you just sell me some new levels? I want to give you my money. I don't understand what I have to do, you know?
Nintendo, I don't understand. Like they just do things at their own push and pace.
Which I love them for, which makes them wonderful and interesting. But occasionally it's like, no, there's money here for you. We can have it. Just give me a couple
more levels. Just add to the thing.
Give me a new level. Give me just something to play differently, so I can play. You know.
Even if it was new skins, I'd probably just be fine if you just.
The model is right there. It's being described by other companies, and just I mean, I read this. I think it's in Range, that book Range by David Epstein, not the other Epstein.
Always any Epstein, you have to say that.
Yeah, I know it's problematic. His branding is somewhat toxic now, but Range, but it's a very good book. I really enjoyed it. It obviously reaffirms my existing beliefs in generalists being more, universally useful than specialists. But then I would think that. But that said, the story of Nintendo, because back to we were discussing before, like one of the frustrations I have with popular, let's call it intellectual culture, podcasts and the like, books about behavior economics or whatever, Oh no, sorry, I was talking to my friend Noah about this before this. He's like, thinks behavioral economics is like a mind virus. It's like a conspiracy theory because everybody knows about it, but no one really understands it. And every podcast you listen to about any topic at some point mentions Daniel Kahneman. I call it the Kahneman Index, where how long before you mention Daniel Kahneman in your book or podcast dictates how likely I am to finish that. Because I'm like, I've read his books, I've read them, I know all this stuff. It's like, oh, I get that he's the giant of this entire thing, but like we have to find new case studies to talk about because I can't read the same thing again and again.
Well, it's why, it's everything, and we see this happen to where things catch, and then it's like, sounds good, and everybody says it, but
We
how,
don't get it.
what's
Everyone's
behind it?
irrational. Like, not really. Everyone's adaptive, evolutionarily speaking, and the world changed. Not the same thing, but that's okay. But anyway, in Range talks about the history of Nintendo and how they were a trading card company and a sort of wooden toy company. And they did a couple of mega pivots into taking ridiculous leaps, like hugely difficult leaps of business, and then working within the constraints of 8-bit processing, music-wise and graphics-wise, which led to so many of the distinctive features of Mario and so on and so forth. Like, it's one of those innovation stories I've not heard over and over again, and just reading it, it's like, wow, it's just super interesting as a company.
Yeah, it is, and it's also a really interesting example of something that is not Western, really popular culture that doesn't begin there, and how very
Good point.
different it is, and how it just gets kind of enveloped into the Western as an aesthetic, right? Like anime, a lot of Japanese. I mean, they just, after World War II, it's an interesting, very interesting story of how toys and imagination and popular culture there got to where it is.
Such a good point that had not occurred to me at all. But yeah, video game culture is not Western culture. It comes from somewhere else primarily. Like, it reminds me of, I'm sure we played many board games together when we had chance to be in person, but like the reason games like Settlers of Catan and those kinds of games all come out of Germany, it's because Germany's board game tradition is basically post World War II, where most games are involving conflict. Chess is a conflict game. Risk is obviously a conflict game. Most games have like Monopoly. There's like dominate and
War.
fight.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
it's
Absolutely.
war, but by the means, like sport generally is, right? And Germany's like, yeah, we don't feel good about that. So their games are very different. So collaborative games come out of that system, like asset building games, growing games, building a town games. All these games come out from different mechanics because of their culture going, conflict is not the only mode of engagement between two people that want to spend some time together doing something silly.
God, that is really interesting. I didn't think of that, and it makes sense, and similar to Japan too, of them being in a place of very little resources and being pretty much not having anything to make stuff on. So hey, we're just gonna make stories and toys and ideas more, right? Like as um so I do want to get back before you have to take off with Paid Attention coming out in November. Congrats, that's awesome.
Thank you
That's
so much.
coming up.
It's a longer process than I was expecting, but yeah.
What's changed? What made you say, "Hey, I need to take a fresh look at this book"? With, you pegged it a lot for 2015 of where it's going, and our understanding to say, "Hey, you have to earn the attention. You have to
Yes.
be, as well into these new channels, and you have to understand that and kind of filter our ideas through that." How has it changed? Why did you think?
So a couple of things. One, which is I think I was right about some stuff and really wrong about some things too, which I think is appropriate and fine. In very specific terms, the way in which we can measure attention went from being an abstract idea to being a thing. Thanks to companies like Lumen and Adelaide, Karen Nelson Field's new book, The Attention Economy, somebody worked out how you could turn a webcam on your phone or your computer into an attention tracking, eye tracking piece of software device, right? And once they realized that, eye tracking attention-based data went from being very, very expensive to work out to being available and possible. That's a huge change, because now it's like, we can tell you people when you're looking at a stream and your eyes on an ad for 0.3 of a second, you're like, does that mean something or not? Like, it may mean something, but it isn't what I thought we were buying in terms of media terms. So there's a whole different conversation around how we value and price and trade media, because media impressions are a proxy for human attention. They sell opportunities. They sell access to attention. They don't sell the attention. And then maybe different platforms have fundamentally different attentional thresholds. People on cinema screens will watch 3 minutes of indulgent, like fragrance movie made by Baz Luhrmann or whatever, but people thumbing through Twitter will not. And we sort of know that now, right? And like they're just fundamentally different places in which media can be aggregated, or attention is aggregated. I mean, so that's part of it. Part of it is also like, very transparently, the negative externalities of digital media have become more and more obvious in the last few years for lots of reasons, right? Beyond kind of disinformation, beyond the polarization, beyond kind of the fomenting of coups, which is happening mostly on social media or was, I was extremely bullish as a younger person about what I thought Google and to some degree Facebook represented about a new way of doing advertising, a new way of thinking about our relationships with people, a new way of thinking about how companies and people interact in a sort of mutually beneficial way. And that didn't come to pass the way I thought it would. Digital obviously became the dominant medium, but everybody knew that for a long time. Anyway. So I thought that needed a little bit of changing. So most of it I left in the sense that I wanted to be honest and true about how I felt, but I wanted to footnote things or make things clear that I have other thoughts too now that are more nuanced about the digital future that I was very excited about. That was part of it. And then just generally that the discourse about attention in advertising went from being a kind of niche idea when I was first published to now being quite a dominant conversation because of things like the Attention Council, because people are really putting money behind thinking about how attention metrics could be applied to media planning, buying and trading and so on, because what I call peak attention has been reached in like mature markets, America and UK, almost in Australia. So peak attention is where media consumption plateaus at a certain point. It's usually about 12 hours a day of consumption, depending on how you measure that, which is a different confusion. But once you hit about 12 hours a day in the US, it goes up like 1201, 1202, 1206 minutes a year. It's very hard to get more time from people because they have to sleep and eat and use the restroom, I assume. Although most of us are on the phone or the restroom now, which is not very hygienic, but let's be honest, we all do that, right? But so because of that, attention gets sort of peaked. So the nature of attention, the amount of available attention, like low-hanging fruit, is gone. Now attention is a zero-sum game. You have to fight other people for it. If you want it, someone else has already got it. So you have to provide something competitively interesting. It's a zero-sum game, kind of. So I think that's interesting. And I also think as a function of that, people who are very smart at the psychological and sociological and engineering-based manipulation of humans en masse have been forced to go, well, we can't grow our audience any further, right? Once Facebook hit 3 billion this week, right? There's not many more people left to grow, and growth is a mandate, obviously, because of finance and Wall Street and so on. So what do? Well, you have to get more time. You have to get more attention from people that you've already got on your platform, which leads to certain kinds of behaviors that I think have been deleterious to the industry as a whole, and has led to humans going, I don't feel good anymore when I spend 6 hours doom scrolling. I feel bad. What do I do about that? Hence the rise of meditation in the last decade, the rise of, trying to be less digital or whatever it is. Like, I think we've become culturally aware that our attention is a valuable commodity, but it shouldn't be understood as a commodity. It should be understood as this like rarefied, literally the substance of your existence. Like how you live your life is a function of how you direct your attention, and who you choose to become in the future is also a function thereof. What you put into your head changes who you are, changes what you think, right?
And you say it, and then I'm taking it directly from you, but you are what you eat.
Yeah.
And it is, and if what you spend time with, and this has always been the case in anything you do, change your friends, change your perspective, change 100%. Your anything. And it is like, hey, we have to understand as people how important attention is to who we are and what are we, but brands, corporations, technologies need to understand that as well.
And metaphors are very important. Like when the idea that data is the new oil or attention is a commodity, was sort of coined and played with, is because there's a sort of vast amount of money which can be created from this resource, right? But when we call something a commodity, the nature of late stage capitalism is to strip mine it to the point where it no longer, you know what I mean? That's what we, oh, here's a commodity, I will monetize it until it's all gone. And that, from a person point of view, is unhealthy for all of us, right? We don't want to live in a metaverse. I'd like access to one, for sure. That sounds amazing. Why wouldn't I want to do that? I don't want to live in one. I want to have that choice. I don't want to be the guy in Wall-E in the chair with the screen, right? I want to be like your daughter, like an integrated human being that can move seamlessly from one to the other when it suits my needs. But I don't want to be colonized without my consent. And so that's kind of the whole thing, which is like, attention is something you choose to allocate, but it can be stolen from you through mechanisms you don't have much understanding of, especially if you're tired, especially if you're hungry, especially if you're frightened, especially if you like, all these things lead you to be more easily sucked back into doom scrolling or whatever. So if brands want it, they should learn to respect it.
Yeah, I well put, and like I'm completely on board, because that is a place where I can actually say like it's tough, because the market, you have Facebook, it's a public company. Like when you have built 300 million people in the United States, or everybody on Earth that is on there, well, how are you going to make that price go up and to the right? And it is time, and an algorithm doesn't care how that time if you want to get more time, it's going to give you more time, right? And I get it. We are learning. We are toddlers, to me, still in this world that we have invented. And of course, I'm glad we're getting to it earlier than later, but and that humans are getting it earlier and later. But I think brands have a lot. You can't just say I'm running an ad or a thing on a piece of content and not have any repercussions because at the end of the day, and people don't get this, we should as professionals, but brands, if you are paying for that piece of content, if you're sponsoring that content.
Yes, you've endorsed it.
Period.
You are,
You've
by
endorsed
definition, have endorsed it. And so I've swung full 60. Like, I used to get very angry. I still do. Like, certain large advertisers would threaten to pull media spend from certain publications if they ran negative stories about them, which is a horribly difficult thing that should not be allowed. You can't affect editorial that way. That said, every dollar you put into a certain medium is a choice that you've made strategically, and it's a choice that represents your brand values in its totality. And if you sponsor hate speech, and that's bad, and if you do it accidentally, that's also bad. Like, it's still your responsibility to not do that accidentally, despite the opacity of the media supply chain as it currently exists, right? That's just bad. And so you have to make a choice. You're like, if I have values and I believe in purpose, you can't support things that are genuinely toxic. That's a choice. And it's not like, oh, you can't decide what media does. No, advertising has always done this. Like, the reason American media used to have what's called fair balance is because previously newspapers were funded by rich people and political parties. They were just propaganda magazines. That's all they were. And then when advertising became the mechanism to fund them, because advertising, when it wants to be mass, has to appeal to both sides of the aisle, let's say, especially in America, which is somewhat polarized, they required fair balance. They said, no, it has to be a view from nowhere. That was the whole expression, right? A view from nowhere, because it's like, we can't upset anybody. And that seems to have gone away, where it's like, we just cover both bases. We cover bases wherever the audience buying idea, we find them wherever they are. And I'm like, no, you're still endorsing that. Your money is, you don't get to spend money in the billions without coming with consequence. It's not neutral. It cannot be neutral. That's just not how it works.
Yeah, and then also interesting, it's gone completely the other way, where instead, the idea is, oh, we can get more attention by disrupting, because anger does really good job
Yes.
Of attention. So it's like, okay, if attention is the gold mine,
yeah,
let's get attention.
That's why I wanted to add in a tiny cue. Like, so the quality of the attention is very important, not just the quantity. But equally, I would argue the qualia of the attention is important. And that's an obnoxious term, I accept that. But the qualia means your lived experience of something, right? The way you experience in your head. And if you're reading something and it makes you really angry, does your brand really get much benefit from being in those spaces? Does anger suit your brand's needs, right? Are you trying to solve for? I just feel like thinking about that subjectivity in response to media would lead us to make different choices than we're currently making.
Yeah, I think the idea and what you talk about a lot, and I would have people, check out your pieces before that on just the idea of media diets and
Mm-hmm.
what you're putting in, and then on the other side of it, it was brands understanding more of the responsibility, and just not talking out of two sides of your mouth. Sorry,
Yes,
you can't be all purpose driven. You can't do it, and then have sponsoring content that is doing X, Y, and Z.
100%.
Sorry, it's
I
not how
agree.
it's going to work.
And that's it's also it's like the idea of brand as a sort of cipher for personality, which is a sort of relatively modern idea since the evolution of account planning in the 70s. But the idea is the personalities do have dimensions. You can have different interests, but there has to be some cohesion. And if you can say two completely opposite things and they're both fine within your brand personality, then there's no sense of cohesion there. That can't be something that feels real. It's like,
What what about personal? I know popular culture and as a bigger term, how is it playing in your life right now and over like pandemic? Like what have you been paying
yeah.
attention to in that world?
So,
Fortnite.
so Fortnite became a big part of it recently-ish. I was playing a lot of video games. I was going back to watch. I watched Community straight through from the beginning during the pandemic because best sitcom in the world and makes me happy. So part of it was mostly I was very much doing escapism stuff. Very much in that mode, extremely so. One of the interesting things about leaving America and now being in Portugal is that I don't watch Portuguese television. I don't understand Portuguese newspapers. And so everything is quieter as soon as you get out of your own media market. So it becomes much more selective, much more I want to watch this particular show, but this particular thing, rather than being surrounded by
Well, yeah,
culture, if
because you
that makes
can't
sense.
literally understand. Like it's not pulling you in any way. A headline or a picture even of somebody famous there or a politician just doesn't pull you. So you kind of become you're not the target. So
Yes,
you're
exactly. Which is interesting because we move quite a lot, or we used to, and we will again, hopefully. So you get used to that kind of silence. So being in America was very loud for me, particularly during the pandemic, where all you did was consume media and go for your 1 hour walk a day or whatever it is. So it just got really loud. It was just too much. I still obviously consume a great deal of Twitter, like a vast amount of it, but by itself, I can manage it and tolerate it. But when it's like the backbone to a huge ecosystem of shouting, like it is sometimes in America, it just was too much for me. So I was dialing it
and
down.
I think that's a great transition to if you want to find Faris, Twitter would probably be
Yes.
a great place to connect and pick up on, and you're better than pretty much anybody I know at my feed has changed over the years and it's like a garden that needs curated, right? Like I have to be selective of that, and I just want ideas, honestly. Just like when I read books, I'm hunting for interesting and ideas, and that's okay. So I'll stop a book a quarter of a way through if I'm not finding what I need,
Yeah, yeah, I'm the
and I
same. I
don't
read
feel
that
guilt.
same. Yeah, I'm over that.
But on Twitter, you are on that list, and I'd tell anybody to follow you there because it's very easy to know what you're catching up on and doing, as well as the stuff that you're writing and putting out there on work, other places, and what things you and Rosie are speaking at and doing things. So I would say that would probably be the place to go.
Yeah, at Faris on Twitter. I was early, just me.
Well done, well done. And then Genius Steals too. Do you want to talk about the community at all?
Yes, be great. So, we have a newsletter which is now out to 12,000 people around the world in the creative industries, advertising, marketing, and beyond, which is sort of the interstitial part between speaking and like the school. So, the school was a thing we came up with a couple of years ago, and then during the pandemic had time to actually begin to build. The School of Style and Genius is a continual experiment in community around the content that we kind of germinate and create professionally. So there's a lot of advertising and creative thinking parts of it, but we're increasingly just bringing more and more people to the community. So we had a good friend of ours, artist Steve Chapman, present last week, and we're trying to be as diverse in our inputs as our company's thesis requires us to be, right? Like we were originally creating a newsletter ourselves, and we realized that's not enough. So we now have one edition we do a week, and one edition a guest creator does every week. So a new, different guest creator every week does it, because we want more voices, and we can't. Even though I read a lot of things, and Rosie reads a lot of things, we can't read everything, and we're drawn to our interests inevitably. And I want people who are interested in other stuff that can tell me why I don't know about these things, you know. And the school, yeah, it's been a really fun experiment. It was transparently, like socially, it was really important to us during the pandemic to have these kind of regular meetups, or like, as you know, the little programs we did, the leadership community, like 6 weeks of weekly meetups and exercises and that kind of stuff. Those sort of things were very life-giving during the pandemic. And yeah, we're still working on it. The platform is still does some things we like, some things we don't like. We want it to be better in some ways. We're working with a partner now to try and build it into something that we are very happy with. But as the beginnings of something, it's definitely it's probably what the future of our business realistically will be, right? Like the long-term future will be something like this, and then the gigs will be gravy. But I miss being on stage. I miss it a lot. So I can't wait for that to come back.
Yeah, I did it for the first time at last week in Chicago.
Wow.
Easy crowd though, insurance. It's easy crowd. Like,
That doesn't sound that easy to me, bro. So
no, you can get them rolling. I had them at a good time, near happy hour, and it was good. Yes, I can't wait for you to get back on the stage either. But I will say it's hard for you all to see it from the viewpoint of users. I am a member, and I would say, like, I see the value is I steal a lot of your ideas and put them where needed. Documents of all kinds, right? So there is that library pieces, and all the time, instead of just tweeting you, which you will say, hey, here's that piece that I was talking about. And just being, like I said, I'm an idea hunter. So like introductions to a new person or a new thought or a new POV or whatever somebody else, that is, it's super valuable. And just a really diverse in mind and everything else group from all over the world. It's a great piece, especially for any budding marketers and or ad folk out there. And they don't have to be ad folk. Like, good Lord, bring more people that aren't.
100%. Yeah, we sort of try and balance the inside baseball with the sort of broader creative and strategic thinking stuff, which is, you know, less specific about how to write a creative brief and more about how to think about things, or how to be inspired when you're stuck at home, which is a big thing we've been thinking about the last year, which is, you know, fundamentally, we believe new experiences are important for human beings. They make you nicer and smarter, and if they're in other countries, less racist. So bonus. But it's hard to do that for lots of reasons. You have a job, you have a kid, you're in a pandemic. And so what we can do to get to new experiences without leaving the laptop, which is a big part of what school's trying to do, is kind of what we've been thinking a lot about.
Great. Well, I thank you for coming on here. It's just great to catch up and finally talk some pop culture talk with you. And yeah, find you on Twitter. Find Stolen Genius, School of Stolen Genius, and I wish you a fantastic evening over there. And thanks for being a part. Friday night, it's time. And yeah, thanks for coming on the Pop Marketing Podcast. And see everybody next time.